Very well. Very well. We have Yuval as well. Steph.
Hey, well.
Okay.
Hello.
Hey, Richie.
Hey, Stephanie.
All right, folks, it's 9:01. Let's get going. Again, thank you all for coming. This is how to improve your coding skills room. We are going to talk about coding skills for about the next hour. Roughly how we do it is we chat with speakers for about the first half hour, and then we take questions. This room is hosted in this club called Great Careers in Tech. If you're not following it yet, please go ahead. We do these events, these chats every Thursday night, and you will get notifications automatically once you follow that. If you have friends who would like to join, but they don't have invites, let me know. I have some as well, and I'm sure many of you have as well, and such. Okay, with that, let's get going. So, for one thing I was saying earlier was that coding, by coding we mean programming here, right? Like different programming languages, like lots of them around. We don't mean the old style coding of Morse code or any of that. So just FYI, I did actually get a question on that. So just want to clarify it up front. Um, how do we improve coding skills, right? And this question is relevant for everybody, right? Somebody who's starting out in programming world, somebody who has been programming for a while, and somebody who's looking to exit programming. Programming these days is quite ubiquitous. In fact, any sort of analyst roles, for example, sales analyst roles or like marketing analyst roles, right? Even those roles also need coding. Right? Now, obviously, sales and marketing analysts don't need to be like awesome at coding. They just need to know some coding. So when it comes to improvement, the audience that needs substantial improvement is usually people who write code a lot in their daily jobs, software engineers, or sometimes you don't have the title of a software engineer, but you still end up writing a lot of code. The question is how to improve it. So just to make the discussion interesting, let me take another stand at it, and I'll let Richie and Yuval take the opposite stand. Just signing them up right off the bat. I want to take the stand that it is not possible to improve your coding skills. You are just generally born with a certain type of thinking. Your thinking speed is fixed. And because of that, it is not possible to improve your coding skills. Like the improvement that you typically see is more from your learning of the libraries and recalling of common patterns. Right? But the thinking speed improvements are not possible when it comes to coding. So that's one stand I would like to take. More to keep the debate interesting. Yuval, Richie, what do you think? Is it possible to improve coding skills, and what does improvement mean, in fact, for coding to you?
Well, you made it easier for us because clearly you can improve your coding. Because, well, there are multiple things, right? Usually when we write code, we don't decide line by line what to write. We actually just reuse short patterns that we used before. So the more pattern you know, and as you practice, you can see bigger and bigger patterns. And that's how you can code relatively large amounts of code correctly, by knowing more and more patterns and see how to stitch together those patterns into even bigger patterns. So it's not about your ability to think per se, it's about your ability to express your thinking in patterns of coding.
Yeah, I think I'll add to it. I totally agree with the pattern recognition part of the things. And the second thing being when you practice, you come across different kinds of algorithms, different types of solving the same set of problems, right? So no one is born, you know, completely intellectual and they will know all the algorithms in their head right away. It's people do researches for long time to come up with an algorithm that what could be the possibility and prove it, right? So those things, if you learn those things, those patterns will come to your mind, and then you will be able to improve your coding skills. So for me, improving the coding skills is not just about how fast you can write the code or how many lines you can type about a particular problem, or how many lines you can type in a day. That's not improving the coding. Improving the coding is how efficiently you can solve the given problem with readability. Like readability is also very important, and of course performance, right? Those are the 2-3 things that comes in mind when we say improving your coding skills. And those can be only you can definitely improve them by more practice, learning about more different types of algorithms that exist today, and then recognizing the patterns as you were talked before.
Okay, so folks, I think I forgot to remind you, if you would introduce yourself, that would be awesome. For example, Yuval doesn't have anything on his bio at this point. Yuval, would you like to say like a couple of sentences about sort of where you worked and stuff? That would be awesome, and audience would love it, I think.
Well, I came to California to work for Google. I worked for Google for 4 years. Then you interviewed me at Box, and you decided to get me into the box, I guess. I've worked, and that since then we know each other, right? Box was my first startup. I've worked on multiple startups, and that's in multiple languages, but that's about it, I guess.
I see. Your go-to languages are which one? Java and C++?
No,
Is it?
to be fair, right now, if you ask me to write code, my preferred language is Golang.
I see. Interesting. And Richie, by way of introduction, would you mind?
Yeah, sure. So I started with Intel. So I was at Intel for almost 9 to 10 years. And after that, I joined Dropbox. So I'm a manager. I was manager at Dropbox for 3 years. And right now, I'm just taking a month of break before I start my new job. So that's where I'm right now. And my language of proficiency is C++.
C++. I see. And I'm guessing you're headed to one of the big ones.
I'm deciding. I have offers from Facebook, Google, and Twitter, and Apple. So yeah, one of those. Yeah.
One of those. Okay, awesome. Excellent. And Steph, thank you for putting this together. Now, so patterns, yes. But let's see. In terms of, so how do you improve your patterns, right? Like my sense is that no two software projects are the same, right? And I mean, no, forget the software projects. Like no two pieces of code are the same. If they are the same, then you have to make a function out of it and just call the function, right? Like what is pattern to you in terms of improvement? And again, folks, for those who've joined a little bit late, my name is Soham, one of the two founders of Interview Kickstart. We are talking about how to improve your coding in the Great Careers in Tech Club. And I'm taking the stand that it is generally not possible to improve your coding. You can memorize a few things like the library calls and such, but it is not possible to improve it fundamentally. Your thinking speed can't change. Again, it's more from a debate perspective, and Yuval and Richie are taking the other stand, I think, I hope. And so we are trying to bring out interesting ideas on what can and cannot happen. So my assertion is that the existence of patterns, like how is that even how does it even play out in terms of improvement? Right? If you have the same code in a code base, you obviously just make a function and call it, or make a library and just use that, right? What is pattern recognition when it comes to coding for improvement?
Well, while you can make function of things, still you have pieces of code that it doesn't make sense to move into functions. And while every project is different, you do tend to write in a way the same lines of code, at least in a local limited way, right? It doesn't happen a lot that you write a piece of code that is totally new. It usually resembles a piece of code that you already wrote before, and you just do modifications to that piece of code that you already wrote, possibly multiple times. So as you have more and more patterns in your head, when you have an idea, because we have an idea that we express either in English, for example, or in a drawing or something like that, it's about expressing it in a programming language. So as you do that, you tend to become better and better in that.
Like other thing I would say is like what kind of data structures fit where. That is also kind of a pattern recognition sometimes. So like, you know, there are so many data structures and you can use many of them at a particular problem, but sometimes some are more efficient than others. Like if someone, like just quick example, right, just to make things a little bit interesting, if someone says give me top 5 max elements from blah blah blah, suddenly what comes to my mind? Does it come like, oh, I have to create an array and I have to sort it, or it comes to mind, this looks like a priority queue, so definitely I have to use that. So your basic coding remains the same, that yes, I have to use priority queue and I will do this, blah blah blah. But then recognizing the fact that this is what you have to use is what the pattern recognition would mean. Like next time if someone asks you in system design that, okay, I want to identify top 10 of tweets, whatever, right? So in that scenario, you can recognize the pattern immediately, that, oh, I did that before, something around top n elements, and the same thing I can fit in here to at least begin my conversation. It might not be perfect, but I will start with it. So that's where the pattern recognition will also come into play.
Interesting, very interesting. So you see, pushing this argument further now, coding sort of is two types, right? There are many people on the planet today who largely just use APIs, right, and then and put something together with it. The fundamental core coding, which many people tend to speak like that, to say core coding, which is algorithms, data structures, right, worrying really deeply about off by one errors and stuff, is relatively rare to do. My sense is that it is possible to improve the first type of coding, right? And I'm not talking just interviews here. Interviews are just one part of the entire journey. Even regularly, right? You're using APIs and libraries, and you put things together. That can improve by way of pattern recognition, by way of just knowing the API calls. Right? If you're working in Salesforce, then you have limited API set available to use Salesforce. You're working in whatever Java, for example, like Spring and all that. Like there is a certain set of things available. Or C++, you have some the STL is available, for example. So you could use those, cobble things together, and produce really useful software. Right? Like that piece, which I think 99% of software engineers do, and I've done that in my life as well a lot, and I'm sure many of you have as well. Like that, yes, possible to improve, because you're just trying to align to some sort of a linear business requirement, right? To say, yeah, this button, when the button is clicked, this is what happens. Right? That kind. There, I suppose some pattern recognition will be useful. And there are also some other ways of improvement. Like, for example, when people are starting to write code, when they enter the industry, right, one very popular piece of advice is, which actually is very good advice, is to write code with a purpose. Right? When you have a purpose associated with it, instead of just saying, let me just write some code, right, that makes a lot of difference. Like, for example, contributing to open source projects, right? Like that actually improves it. Because there is a purpose associated with it, and then there is a review, right, associated with it as well. So that kind of code, it seems one can improve, but it seems like there are like two things associated with it. One is that you have a purpose, and two, you have a review with it. Do you think code reviews improve coding skills? Is that an essential part of it, or is it
Absolutely.
like, meh?
Absolutely. I think code reviews definitely helps a lot. There are lots of things as a like initially when you write something great, you feel that yes, I've written the code and it works. You will run on a couple of test cases and it will run. But when someone code reviews it, they will identify scenarios which probably you have not thought when you are thinking on one track of mind, right? Like when you are writing a code, you have this thing that I want to implement a particular scenario and you implemented it, but you potentially forget other things around. So at least in my experience, I have learned from code reviews. I specifically was like, to be honest, initially I was super frustrated when lots of reviews were given to me. And I was like, okay, is my coding so bad that people are giving me so many code reviews or so many comments in the code reviews? But that eventually builds up, right? Then you start thinking about, yes, this could have been better way of writing the code. Yes, mine would have worked, but this could eventually help. So I would say definitely positively code reviews helps.
So code reviews help, that is clear. The problem is that at work, sometimes the reviewers don't have time to look too much about the style, and they care more about correctness. So what I recommend is that from time to time, you cannot do it all the time, but from time to time, you should do kind of code review to yourself. Look at a piece of code and think to yourself, is that really the way I should have written it? And an interesting exercise is actually doing it like a month or 3 months after you wrote the code. When you happen to need to make a change, actually review the code and ask yourself, is the code clear to me as the author of the code? Sadly, sometimes you have to admit that it's not really the case.
That's an excellent point, Yuval. I have certainly had moments in my career when I have had an opportunity to look at the code that I'd done earlier, and I'm like, wow, was I that bad that time? And then I would go fix it with what I know now, right on it. So that is correct. I don't know if I would call it patterns and such. Just I think just more knowledge of the code base also helps quite a bit in many cases. um, but see, the other thing about code reviews is also depends on like who's doing it, right? Like if you want to improve your coding skills and you give your code to somebody else, my suggestion is to give to someone who you trust can give you relevant advice. Oftentimes that doesn't happen in a team. There are few people who actually want to do it, fewer who do it correctly, and even fewer who don't get bored of it. So 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 find the right person to do the code review with. The other thing about code reviews, if you're looking for improvement, is don't send, again, my advice is don't send a lot of code to review for them. Like just send bite-sized chunks, right? If I send 10 files for review, like they will do a cursory review. But if I send like just one function, two functions to review, what will happen is that they will point out four mistakes, right? And that will improve coding. um, this method of just bite-sized reviews, right, has helped me in the past on it. Like, I used to do the other thing first. Like I used to send a lot of code first, just hoping that somebody will get impressed that I've written a lot of code. But that's really not the point. The point really is, when you are in the learning journey of improving your coding, send bite-sized chunks. Um, Invite feedback from the people you trust, right? And keep doing it a few times, and that signal to noise ratio there is going to be extremely high for it. The culture of the company, if you're in a company versus a friend or something, the culture of the company also needs to support that fact. Sometimes companies don't think about it very much, and code reviews become judgmental. But anyway, so that needs to happen. That's absolutely one thing. What what do you think about finding mentors to improve coding? What if you were to find a mentor, what would you tell them? How would you find them? What would you tell them to say, hey, I want to improve my coding? So you're beginning, your career in coding. You're in college or something like that, or a boot camp or something, and you want to improve your coding. See, this is your first job, right? How would that relationship work? What would you tell them to improve coding?
Well, first I will tell them that just like you cannot learn swimming by reading a magazine, right? You cannot learn to code by reading about coding. Coding is done with the fingers. You need to make your fingers work in order to learn to code. So simply put, if you want to learn to code, you need to code, and you need to code a lot. Because as I said, we need to get your brain get familiar with the process of having a thought in your head and expressing it in a certain programming language. So it is like many other skills, it is, among other things, about repetition, especially when you start.
Yeah, I agree to that. And I think it's also more like don't be afraid of writing the code initially. And as Soham also pointed at some point of time that, sometimes code reviews can be judgmental, but in your initial career phase, I would say don't worry about that. Like, you want to get more and more feedback, whether it's in the form of execution, whether it's form of unit testing, whether it's form of code reviews. You want to get more and more feedback so that you can learn from it. The only thing you have to make sure is that, and this is something which I tell all my folks as well with whom I work, that when some senior engineer is giving you any feedback, make sure you recall or keep that in your mind so that you don't make that kind of mistake or that kind of thing again, and that's where your improvement happens. That's how you will judge that you are improving. If you are making same things over and over again, you're not improving. Then it will become into that judgmental land where Soham was talking about, that yes, I've given this person code review a couple of times, same type of things, they're not improving. But if you keep on a track of it, like, yes, I got this feedback, I will keep that in mind. Next time I have certain scenario, I'll make sure I have a checklist which I'm checking that prior comments that were made are addressed here. That definitely helps. Like, keeping those type of checklist at a high level initially help you to just make it a regular routine.
That is a good point. Actually, like, many people don't improve in coding in their lives, not because they don't get an opportunity to code, but like they're quite afraid of putting it out. Right? Like you said, you should not be afraid of putting code out. Um, and certainly the culture needs to support that. Certainly, culture needs to support that. But in any case, like, you don't have to just be in a company to improve your coding, right? Like, an open source contribution will also improve your coding. And if you're worried and concerned about what will you contribute in an open source project, let me tell you that every single open source project is looking for volunteers, right? At all levels, right? You could be simply improving their documentation, right? As a trivial exercise. And the next thing you could do is simply improving spelling mistakes, comments, right? And the next thing, start just improving, like, fix like a P4 kind of bug, right? Very simple P4 things that you could fix. Like, just a messaging fix could also happen. So start there if you're worried about getting judged, right? Once you make commits into those open source projects, like, you will get reviews, right? You will become a familiar face, and then you take on bigger things from there. That will certainly improve coding. Some of the open source projects have some of the best code that I've ever seen written, and the reason is very simple. Like, it is public, and it goes through public reviews, right? Like, goes through reviews of a few people across the planet, right, before a commit is merged to production. So so that kind of thing is not even available at work, right? Like, and this is available free outside. So, like, make use of that. I would say, and I would urge to improve coding. The do you guys do you agree? Like, do you know of any open source projects that would that you have used in the past and such?
open source project that I've used?
Sorry, contributed to, I mean.
You know, I would really like to say that the answer is yes, but I'm afraid that the answer is no. I keep being too busy at work. This is always something on my mind. Should contribute to open source projects, but I'm afraid that right now the answer is still no.
Still no. Got it, Richie?
Same here. No, but I think one thing I would also add is if you get the opportunity to go to some live code review sessions, like for all these many open source projects, there are live code review sessions as well. So even if you're not if you feel you're not in a position to contribute, going in those sessions helps to understand how the reviewer is actually thinking, and getting their mindset of what they're thinking when they're code reviewing, what kind of comments they're making. That definitely helps. So that I have attended, but yes, I have not directly contributed.
So the other thing I've seen people do to improve the code is to just compare their code with somebody else's, right? And that becomes easier, especially in interview preparation setting, right? Even if you're not preparing for interviews, right? It doesn't matter. But take an interview problem, right, that is publicly available out there, write code, right, for it, and see other code that other people might have written, right? And compare and contrast to that exercise also is a very high signal to noise ratio exercise to do. Is that a fair statement, you all?
Yes. But to be fair, usually our problem is that we are stressed about work and we just want to finish our tasks. But we should really try to make a time, as I said, to say, now I want to make sure that I'm actually coding good. Look again at your code and see that you're doing well, because there is a problem that because of the work stress, we tend to just try to move forward with our tasks.
Yes. So I suppose these are outside work exercises, like say contributing to open source, or or say maybe even finding a mentor outside work, or just comparing your code with somebody else's code on an interview problem, right, outside work. So
yeah, definitely.
Very, very interesting. The let me switch gears a little bit. Like, does code quality even matter? Right? Like, why would you even want to improve your coding? Right? As long as it works, like, and it's sort of generally fast enough, right? And sort of most of the times there are no bugs. Like, why would you even care about it? Right? Even in real sense, like, why care about improving? Like, as long as it works, why don't just move on and do something? At the end of the day, it's just a tool, right? Like, just solve the problem and move on.
Just as mean some. The context of the discussion is coding for living, right? For a living. And that means that our goal is to write good code, readable code as fast as possible. That is good coding. That's what we are interested in doing. This is not some type of artistic style that we want the code to somehow be beautiful by itself, okay? The idea is that we want to become better at writing correct, fast, readable code that takes us less time to write. And I'll give you an example. So we all know in our relative languages about all those rules of how to code. Some of those rules are better than the other, but you need to have your own feedback loop. Like, if you spend 5 hours debugging your piece of code and then you found a stupid mistake, you should ask yourself, what coding style could have improved that, making sure that I will not have this stupid mistake again, right? A common thing, right, for example, is that you write an if statement, and the body of the if statement is one line only, because many languages allow you to, and you don't put curly braces, right? Because many languages allow that. And then I hope that everyone in the room knows that the problem is that if you add another line to it and forget to put curly braces, then the other line is even is not under the effect of the if statement, right? So there's a type of mistake that you can say, if it happened to me, maybe I should change the style. Interestingly enough, there's a side comment in Golang, they decided not to allow that at all. You have to write curly braces.
So I would add to it, like from a company perspective or wherever you are working, I would look at two things, like sustainability of the projects and adaptability. I think those two is very important for the team or the company. If you are writing a code and you won't be there for 10 years, you won't be there for 20 years to keep working on that code. You will move on to a different project, you will work on something else, someone else will come up and take it over. If someone else takes it over, does they take like hours and hours to go through your code and understand what's happening, why it's making? And one thing which you will said, like debugging, are they taking hours and hours of debugging? We don't want that, right? So the idea should be the code should be sustainable, and if new person comes in, it's easier for them to just take it over and quickly go through it. Adaptable, like things will not remain same for next couple of years, they will change. How easily it is possible to change things? Do you have to rewrite the whole thing? It is a waste of company's time and your time, or someone whoever else is doing their time and energy, right? So you are like, practically you are paid to make sure that company goes forward, and these are the areas which they want to also improve. So that means you also have to improve when you're writing these codes.
Yeah, no, that's actually very true. Now we'll talk about readability and adaptability in a second, folks. Let me just refresh the room. My name is Soham, and we are with Steph, Yuval, and Richie. We're talking about how to improve your coding skills in the Great Careers in Tech Club. We are about the halfway mark. In just a couple of minutes, we'll take questions. We'd love to hear your questions, any comments, any experiences that you would like to share with other listeners on what helped you improve your coding skills. And as well, we talked about contributing to open source. We talked about looking at somebody else's code. We talked about readability, adaptability a little bit. We talked about finding mentors, code reviews, and you all gave examples as well for it. So all of that is fair game. We talked about two different kinds of coding and such. So please feel free to raise your hand. We'll invite you to the speaking stage in a second. Let's talk a little bit about readability and then invite questions. So, I mean, somewhat of a rhetorical question, like why is readability even important? Right? Now, for the most part, right, we don't really go back to the code, do we? Like, yes, we do sometimes. Like 10% of the times we do go back to the code, but once it sort of starts to work, it just becomes furniture, right? And then sort of why is readability important? Why should one agonize about it? Because I've seen many people agonize about readability, right, of code. Obviously, I understand that one it's important, so to speak. But why exactly is readability important, and why is that a part of improvement in your coding process?
Readability is important because you have bugs, and you will have to revisit the code to fix the bugs, whether it's the original author or something else or someone else, but you need it to be readable for that. Second thing is that, practically speaking, nowadays, with the fast pace in which we are moving, the code is the documentation. Other developers need to actually read your code in order to understand what the system is doing. Also, because we are moving fast, the requirements change. So even if your code is good, very soon the company will need your code to do something slightly different. So the same code, even if it's good, keeps getting modified.
But like, what percentage of code, right? Like many people agonize about all pieces of code that they write must be like very readable. Like maybe 10% of code is touched by others.
No, Sam, no. And don't forget my explanation about the code as the documentation. Even if you don't change it, you read it in order to understand what the system is doing.
And even for solving a simple minor bug, if you don't know what's happening in the code, then it's very difficult. You will spend hours and hours to solve it, where it might be even very simple to solve it if it is the code is readable and you can quickly go through it and say, yeah, here it is.
I suppose the way I have
Actually,
come to terms with it. Sorry, but Bharat, you were saying something?
yeah, I have one input. Actually, the other reason why this is more important is, in my opinion, is that typically you have a lot of items to do. I mean, your tasks will come and go, your projects will come and go, and it's very hard for a programmer like for me to remember what I did maybe 3 months ago. I mean, like what was my line of thinking when I'm reading it. Is suddenly after 3 months you're actually reopening your code for maybe doing a bug fix or whatever. It's like, okay, you'll spend more time trying to scratch your head and figure out what happened, or if there are, especially where it's an algorithmic thing, if there is clear documentation or within the code itself, like easy stuff to say, okay, these are the use cases or cases that we had to look at, it becomes a good refresher and we don't miss out on those things. So that is for yourself. The second thing is, as we grow into our careers, there will be other members coming in working on that code. Maybe it's within your team, or there might be sustaining engineering coming in and looking at the code when they're handling customer bugs, or support looking at that code to try and figure out how they can triage the problem. Those kinds of, it's basically like third party are other people who are essentially looking at your code and trying to figure it out. And the easier it is, it makes it makes it easier for everyone in terms of maintainability as well. So that is one piece that I would like to add to your points on readability.
Anyway, but did you have a question also, or did you come to just speak about readability? Or a comment?
There was one more point that I wanted to bring up, and I look maybe that is not discussed yet. Is essentially unit testing of your code. So, which is another way to also improve your code, because then you start thinking on how you're going to test, and these are smaller tests and thinking of various conditions, how the code is going through, and getting into that habit of unit testing or test first kind of a model, because once we get into that discipline, it becomes much easier to figure out either in terms of robustness of code. And also, I think you mentioned one more point, right, about if some change comes in, does someone have to rip and replace the whole piece of code, or it's much more modular? I think that unit testing hat might help one think about it. That, oh, I think this test is getting too complicated. I need to break it down, and maybe that translates into breaking down your code.
Interesting. Unit tests would help you improve your code. Would it help you improve the code if you are the one writing unit tests, or if somebody else is writing those unit tests that you would improve your coding?
Actually, in my experience, I did it myself. I used to write the unit tests. I mean, I have not coded in a long time now. Been managing the teams, but whenever I was coding, I would think about it the other way. It's similar to, like, I think someone meant, one of you, the panelists actually mentioned that you review your own code. So this is kind of testing your own code and thinking further than before, catching your own issues before someone else does. So in that sense, I think it does help, because when you start thinking of making it, the tests get complicated, we start thinking of, okay, I should probably look at my own code and simplify it. So you do a proactive job of doing it rather than having someone to tell you about it. That's my experience.
Makes sense. Anybody has any comments on unit testing as a way to improve your code?
Well, unit testing by itself helps you find bugs, right? And everything that gives you feedback about the quality of the code, it helps in that. So code reviews, unit testing, definitely.
I see. But see, if you write your own unit tests, which I'm not against as such, but I've seen the same holes in the unit test as well, right? You make certain assumptions writing code, and you don't test for those assumptions in unit tests, right? Like it's the same mind thinking about
So
doing and testing.
So I started my career at Microsoft, I'm afraid, many years ago. But when I started at Microsoft, that was the time when you bought a software in a box, right? And there was a CD-ROM in the box. And at that time, the way we did testing at Microsoft was actually an adversarial system. That is, the developers did not write tests at all. Only the test team wrote tests, and it felt like a game. Like the goal of the testing team was to find as many bugs as possible. But now, to be fair, because we usually work, those companies that work with the internet in general, quality went down and people just want to move faster. So yes, I agree with you. Writing tests as a game, as an adversarial game, actually gives better result. But right now, companies don't have resources for that. So they just ask the developers to write their own tests. And sometimes if you miss something in the code, you will miss the same thing in the unit test.
Mm, Interesting. I think that a topic of discussion on its own. I think adversarial testing versus self-testing. Fascinating. Naveen, you had a question as well, or a
Yes,
comment?
yes, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. A lot of really value-added discussion going on. I have a question related to, let's say we are learning about how to improve our coding, and now you get a job, and everyone after a few years change their job where they're again tested on the coding skills and problem solving skills. So code reviews will help you in your current job, but for those coding interviews, how do you keep yourself in the growth mode?
Welcome to my world, man. Right. I would obviously love to hear from everybody, but how do you keep up for interviews? Yes, interview coding is actually different from just day-to-day life coding. Most people don't do any sort of algorithms and stuff. Most people do not need to write code at the speed at which interviews expect you to do it. The the only sustainable way, is to just practice very regularly. Every carve out some time every week, right? Like with either people at work or outside, and say we will solve one problem a week. That's it. Just solve one problem a week, and in between two interview preps, right? Or in between two job switches.
Uh, I would
And
like to take this question if you mind.
yes, Vishal, go ahead.
So it's a great question. I mean, so different companies have a different way of judging your coding skills. So as you gain more and more knowledge over a product or over any sort of software which you develop, so the core fundamentals would always be your algorithm. That would be the must, and they would be mm, judging you on the architectural side. So let's say you are given a problem of going around with building some application, and what all are the architecture and how well are you versed with developing and going around with your architecture, with the concepts of how do we use sort of architect software patterns. So those are the areas which people and higher like team leads and your managers are really very interested in knowing how well are you aware of those concepts, and at the same time your algorithm surely will be judged and your on the first round itself. Hope this answers the question.
And thank you, Vishal. Did you also have a question of your own?
No, I was about to talk about unit testing
Mhm.
based on that. So unit testing is always there based on assumption. I agree on that. But another cool thing about unit testing is we can know how much is our coverage, how much coverage does our code have. So it is a great metric, like provides a dashboard kind of thing to get to know that how much are we yet covered and how much percentage is left to being exposed that is vulnerable. So certain aspects of functions, or let's say at times developer just forget to use a flag, or they set a flag and they don't use it and it's not being unused. So these minute elements which critically add more and more lines into a specific file, they get ignored, and unit testing does help us to capture those specific areas and gets to a point that how can we optimize our code and get to a cyclomatic complexity which tells us about how many number of nodes and points are there with this specific function.
Right. Thank you, Vishal. Appreciate it. Ravi, did you have a question as well?
Yeah, thank you. Just a point on the unit testing. I do believe
Mm-hmm.
that unit testing would help improvising the code. So the challenges that I have seen, I mean, not personally me, but like on the team, not every developer would be able to think through all the major, not all, major test cases. They may have one or two in their mind, like when they develop the code and they wait until like the defects are opened. So an opinion what I have, my personal opinion is like a review team should do a peer review of the unit test cases. This much before we sign up the development work. So that would help the team to contribute adding or unit test cases. In such scenario, who should be a part of that review team? A business analyst, someone who is like who have the first hand information, an architect or something like that. How I mean, I don't want to make it more complicated, but like I just wanted to know.
You want to take it quickly?
Well, sure.
Or
And a code review has to be done by basically a programmer, a member of your team. The coworker, the software engineer that is doing your code review needs to know the requirement, but they also need to know coding very well. Therefore, the business analyst or the product managers will not, usually speak, if they're not, if they don't happen to be also programmers, they will not be good code reviewers. But you have to make sure that the code reviewer knows very well the requirement from your change.
Yeah, I will second that to you all, that it's not necessary that it has to be the architect of the project. Definitely not any business analyst or the product analyst, but someone who knows end to end what is to be built, and someone who has the ability to think of the project end to end. And definitely, like, most likely, if it is a larger project, it might be your peer or might be even senior, so that they understand more than what you can also think of.
Right. One other question on that note. We hear about these code review tools, right? So what is your opinion on that? Does it cut down some of the tasks that an actual code review team would be doing it?
Folks, the one thing I would say is that let's stay on point, improving the coding skills. We can do another session on unit tests and code reviews and such as well. And we also have several other questions to take. I appreciate that. One other comment I would make is that don't ever agonize about making things perfect. Right? Like you your code gets to production bugs after all your thinking, all your effort, fine, right? That's okay. Fix it quickly and move on from that. It is very agonizing otherwise to say let's just write more and more tests and more and more tests and let's make sure that this doesn't happen and that doesn't happen. Or like to a certain extent one has to do it, but one has to know where to draw that line as well. I hope you're not agonizing about it, and nobody should beyond the point. So no point having sort of business people review the code, right? As such, they would obviously not be able to say anything from the code or or otherwise.
Hey Suham, I have a question.
Mhm.
Suppose in your current team, there are very few senior developers, and you are one of the senior developers, and you do code reviews for your team who are junior developers. So, how do you find opportunity for yourself to learn and grow in your current role?
By so for improving your own coding or
Yes, yes, for yourself.
for yourself. So by way of code reviews, because otherwise you are, I mean, you might be a senior developer, but you are a senior developer. So it's the same thing as anybody else is. A senior developer also needs to continue to improve their code by reading and by comparing their code with others and such. Like, is that what you mean? Sorry, I'm not sure
Yeah,
if I
yeah,
exactly.
yeah. You understood correctly.
Yeah. And so and so, or are you saying that how should you do a code review such that the junior developers improve their code? Is that the question? Sorry.
No, I'm asking just for myself. How should I improve myself right now?
Right. Yeah. No. So same things. Like, I mean, the techniques and the thoughts that we had all through the session, I mean, they apply to really anybody. Right? Anybody. Like new paradigms keep coming every so often anyway, and so you have to keep up. Right. The more senior you get, and if you're an individual contributor, the expectation is that you have kept up. Right. Like, for example, if you're a C++ programmer, then you have kept up with the new editions of C++ that are coming out, right? Or the nuances of library differences and stuff like that. So that's one. When you are, as you're a senior engineer, you have to keep up. There's no escape to that. If you are an individual contributor programmer with whatever title it is, if you are in the one of the senior titles, then you have to continue to keep up with it. So that's reading about new features and new things and trying to incorporate them into your existing stuff is one thing that you should explicitly do. Um, the and sending your code for code reviews, right? Just because you are a senior developer doesn't mean somebody else who's junior to you should not review the code. And your code, when you send it to review to junior developers, you will improve, they will improve, right? As well. It's slowly and steadily. If you stay at a company like a few months at least, you will know who's doing good code reviews, and then send your code to those people. They may be in a different org, but still send it, right? Because you'll learn a lot from that. um, but other than that, like we talked about patterns earlier as well, right? Try and identify patterns, and sometimes when you identify, you forget, so do write them down, right? As well, like this code, this pattern. There are also some people who are just very naturally very inclined to write code. Like, for example, I remember I was in my grad school. There was a guy who used to write code like you would like speak, you know, so that fast. He would start the for loop and just write and then complete it at the end. Like, sort of, I at the time would start the for loop, put the braces, and then think about what I were to write. Like, he wouldn't put the ending brace. He would put the starting brace and just write the lines and then put the ending brace. Like, and then he would just continue with this. Like, he would do nested for loops to do that. Like, so there are people like that as well, who you can learn and watch with as well. That these days there are Twitch streams as well for people who are coding. So if you're an individual contributor to to this, like you all said earlier, like your housing and retirement comes from coding, then you have to keep up basically. Does that answer the question, or is it?
Yes, it does. Awesome. Thank you.
Sorry, you had said something as well.
So let me add something on that. Actually, doing code reviews for other people is a very good opportunity to improve your own coding, because you see, when you do code review to someone else, you are not emotionally attached to the code, right? So you can look at it very objectively, and you do that. You look at a piece of code and you ask yourself, is it clear or not? If it is clear, you're asking yourself why it is clear, and you want to do more of that. If you look at someone else's code and see that the code is unreadable, then you don't want to do that. And it's important to note that sometimes what we don't like in other people's code, we actually tend to do by ourselves. So, but by reading someone else's code and seeing that a certain pattern makes the code less readable, it should be a lesson for you to avoid that pattern when you yourself write code.
Makes sense. Yep, makes total sense. One has to do it with interest. I mean,
Yes, that makes sense. Making a checklist of what to do and what not to do is also important. Yes, thank you.
awesome. Venkatesh, sorry, you had a question or comment? Venkateswar. Sorry, I hope I'm not butchering the name. You're on mute if you're speaking. Okay. Sridhar?
Yeah, Shoham. I want to add one point. So, anyway, for this session, sir, these sessions are very helpful. Thank you very much for conducting these sessions. I'm from IK batch. So it was great. So to improve the coding skills, right? So for initially, the code reviews might help within the teams because I feel more or less within a team, right? All are in the same boat. So I mean, after some time, if you spend in a team, okay. So mm, and then so I have improved my coding skills mainly through online uh, on top coder hate code. So in that, right, when you submit your code, so you write some hundreds of lines, say some 100 lines you wrote for one big program. And once you submit, right, the code in that, and you could compare your code with the top, those who made the top code, right? Like it's very faster. So you could compare with them. And then you could optimize your code. And through that, I have learned my coding skills a lot when compared to my
Yep.
peers reviewing the code. So that's what I have seen. And then participating in the open source projects also helps. But compared to within the company, I don't see at some point it's okay for the initial time it will improve, but later on I don't see much improvement within a team as a reviewing code. So this is what I wanna add the point. And then once I joined IK, yeah, then there I did a lot of practice and then a lot of patterns I learned it. So those are like pretty helpful. And then I improved my speed also there while practicing a lot of online programs. Yeah, and then coming to unit testing, I don't see much unit testing will improve the coding skills. It will test the only the functionality. I mean, whatever the logic we give, what is the input and what is the output. I think that only it will give the unit testing. I don't see much improvement from my side. I mean, my point of view from the unit testing.
Interesting.
Yeah, these are the points. Yeah. Thanks for that.
But Sridhar, when you write a unit test and the unit test finds a bug in your code, so of course you fix the bug, but you should also ask yourself why the bug was there to begin with. And that's where, when you improve your coding, you should ask yourself, what should I do that when I write similar piece of code, I will not have that bug again?
Yeah, I agree that point. My point of view, coding improvement means like very point to the code. It's not like to write it. See, when very good programmer wrote 5 lines of code, and when I write some 50 lines of code, so those will not be captured in the unit testing. Okay, I mean, I'm saying in that context, the unit testing might not be that much helpful to improve the coding skills. It may find some bugs.
Yeah, Sridhar, I think you are right. I think different people's experiences are different. I think that the question is like, where are you in your improvement journey, right? If you are relatively early, a unit test will give you a lot of value. If you have the right people as well with you, that'll also give you a lot of value. But the other point you brought up is also very important, that doing things on in the competitive programming land will also improve quite a bit when you're stagnated within your team, right? Say unit tests are not giving you much improvement, the code reviews within the team are not giving you much improvement, then doing competitive programming coding helps you quite a bit, right, to improve your code. And many people shy away from competitive programming because it is competitive and judgmental, but you don't have to, like, you don't even have to say who you are on those platforms, right? and you can just you can improve. But that's a very, very important point. Like, as much as contributing to open source, right? Comparative programming also helps you improve. Forget interviews also. It helps you improve. Just take one problem, solve it, look at other people's code, and then you'll improve that. That was a very good point, Sridhar. Awesome. Richie, you have any other thoughts on that? At some point, you stagnate, right, with people around you and say, I'm not improving my coding skills. Now, what do I do? Any thoughts on it?
I think all the points that we discussed make sense to me. And when the stagnation occurs, like I think someone asked about, like, I don't have any more. I'm the senior most engineer in the team, and that's where you start feeling about the stagnation. That okay, yeah. One thing I would also note it down is that sometimes even if you are senior, when you write your code, you give it to your review to even junior engineers. I have seen some junior engineers come up with very good questions as well. So I wouldn't disregard that your code review to junior engineers is not that useful, because most likely they will ask questions. Hey, I don't understand why you did that. Can you explain? And then you start thinking about it. Yes, why did I write it? Maybe I should do it something different, right? So that also definitely helps, and at least based on my experience as well, I have improved my code a couple of times based on that information. And the other thing, probably, I don't know if it was mentioned but captured or not. If you don't have anyone senior than you, then I would highly also recommend to find someone senior, and then which may not be in your team, which may be, outside your team, and they don't might not be able to review your code on regular basis, but once in a while, if you can treat them as a mentor, ask them that, hey, I want your suggestions, and this is like large and complicated piece of code I've written, can you please do it? That definitely also helps. So I think very high focus in this discussion on code reviews, but I think that definitely helps a lot in improving your coding.
Got it. Okay. Sounds good. One other tip which I had received. I don't think I followed up on it very well, but so I don't have first-hand experience in it. But you all might be able to say one last thing is about switching languages. Sridhar and others, say you feel like you're saturated in one language, switch the language. Write code in a different language, and that will also lead to improvement. You all, is that a fair statement to make? Is it like cross learning?
So I'm very sorry. You don't switch languages because you're saturated with a language. You switch language when your employer tell you to switch a language. Let's be real about that. But anyhow, in many things in life, knowing two things is way, way, way better than knowing one thing. That is, programmers who know two languages in many cases would program much better than programmers who know only one language. Because when you see the world, in this case, the world of programming from 2 points, you actually understand it much better. After that, when you learn more languages, it becomes better, but it's the switch from one language to another language, especially if the other language is not in the same group of languages, is actually very big. So if you really know only one language, then maybe you want to try to learn languages from other groups or just another language, because it will help you become better programmer.
Very interesting. Yeah, like picking up a functional language, for example, right? Completely different paradigm of writing compared to iterative. Okay, awesome. Any other closing thoughts, Richie, you all? Anybody else really?
I think my closing thought is only, practice, practice, practice. Like that is one of the biggest things for coding, for sure.
Makes sense. Practice. Code review. Unit test. Looks like that's sort of the discussion was dominated by the 3 points, and obviously I think Sridhar's point about competitive programming is also excellent. Just in the same line as practicing interview coding. Yeah, you have anything? Last thing.
Well, coding, while we as software engineers we do other things, coding is our main skill. So being good coders just makes you feel better with your professional abilities. So I think it's very important to make sure that you maintain high level of programming ability. You will feel better with yourself when that is the case.
Makes sense. Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Richie. Thank you, Yuval. As usual, very good discussion. Love exploring things with you. Every Thursday evening, folks. Very good questions. Keep coming. Follow all of us and each other. Follow the club. You'll get all the notifications. And next week, same time, we'll come back with something else, even more interesting stuff. Thanks again for all your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, you all.
Bye.